Tonight, we are going to spend some time together exploring one of the most beautiful teachings in the Buddhist tradition. It is a teaching about a quality of mind that the ancient teachers treasured above nearly all others. They placed it at the very peak of human development, the last and highest of all the great virtues. And yet, it is not something grand or complicated. It is something very simple and very close to home. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. The theme we will explore tonight is the ability to remain at peace, even when life moves around us in unpredictable ways. The ancient teachers called it equanimity. Now, that word might sound formal or distant, but equanimity is not a cold thing. It is not the absence of feeling. In fact, the old texts describe it as something luminous and bright, something warm and deeply alive. It is the kind of peace that does not shut the world out but allows us to meet the world with an open and steady heart. So let yourself settle in. Let the weight of your body be held by whatever is supporting you. And let us begin this journey together. There is an old saying in the Zen tradition: sitting quietly, doing nothing, spring comes, and the grass grows by itself. Tonight, as you rest, we begin with that spirit. Not striving to become anything, not rushing toward any destination, simply being present and allowing what is wise and gentle to reveal itself, the way spring reveals green things without effort or hurry. The teaching we are exploring tonight, equanimity, is like that. It is not something we force into being. It is something that emerges when we stop struggling quite so hard, when we stop grasping at what we want and pushing away what we do not want, when we allow the mind to settle, like water finding its own level. But before we go further into the teaching, let us begin with a story. Because stories have a way of reaching places that explanations cannot. The Buddhist tradition has always known this. For thousands of years, the deepest truths have been carried not in arguments or theories, but in tales passed from teacher to student in quiet rooms, under trees, beside rivers, in the gentle hours before sleep. So let yourself settle a little deeper into wherever you are resting, and let the story come to you. Let us explore a story about an old master who lived in a mountainous land, in a time when the world moved a little more slowly than it does today. This master had spent the greater part of his life in quiet study and contemplation. He was known in his region as a person of remarkable inner calm. People would travel long distances simply to sit in his presence, because there was something about him that made the air feel more still. He had that quality that the Buddhist teachings describe as a mind that is not easily shaken, a mind that has been refined by years of patient practice and honest self-awareness. He was not a perfect man. He would have been the first to say so. But he had cultivated, through decades of effort and surrender, a steadiness that most people found deeply reassuring. When difficult news came, he could receive it without being swept away. When joyful news arrived, he could appreciate it without losing his footing. He had learned, over many years, how to stand in the middle of life's weather without being toppled by it. People who knew him well said that being around him was like sitting beside a very old tree. There was a rootedness to him, a quiet gravity that made everything else feel a little calmer too. He laughed easily. He listened well. He did not seem to need anything from the people around him, and perhaps that was why they felt so at ease in his company. One morning, late in his life, the master found himself walking along the shore of a mountain lake with a young student. It was early, and the world was still waking up. The mist had not yet lifted from the water. It hung low over the surface in thin, pale layers, softening everything. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible and your skin tingle. The lake stretched out before them, silver and very still, reflecting the peaks above, like a great, quiet mirror. There was birdsong somewhere in the trees behind them, and the faint sound of water dripping from stones. It was the kind of morning that asks you to be quiet, and both of them were. The young man was full of energy, as young people often are. He had spent many months studying under the master, and there was a warmth between them, a fondness that comes from shared purpose and mutual respect. But the young man was also restless. He had the kind of vitality that does not like to stand still for very long. "The water looks wonderful," the young man said, gazing out across the lake. "I think I will swim across." The master looked at the water. It was cold, very cold. The kind of cold that belongs to mountain lakes fed by snowmelt. He could feel it in the air just standing at the shoreline. The young man pulled off his outer garments, waded into the shallows, and with a joyful shout, dove forward and began to swim. His strokes were strong and confident. The water parted around him in bright arcs, and soon he was moving steadily away from shore. The master stood watching, and here is where the story turns. Because in that moment, watching his young student cutting through the cold water with such ease and vigor, something stirred inside the old man. Something very quiet and very quick. It was not a thought, exactly. It was more like a feeling, a flicker, a small spark of something that might have been pride or competitiveness, or perhaps just a memory of his own younger body and what it had once been able to do. Before he had fully noticed what was happening, the master had made a decision. He would swim across too. He stepped into the water. The cold hit him like a wall. His breath shortened, but the spark that had lit inside him was still burning, and it carried him forward. He began to swim. For a little while, everything seemed fine. His arms moved through the water. His breath came in short clouds. The far shore was there ahead of him, clear and reachable. But the cold was deeper than he had expected, and his body was older than his spirit remembered, and very gradually, stroke by stroke, his strength began to fade. He did not make it across. Now, let us pause here and sit with this story gently. We do not need to dwell on the sadness of the ending. What matters for us tonight is what happened in that single quiet moment on the shore. That flicker, that small, almost invisible impulse that arose before the master had time to see it clearly. A lifetime of wisdom and practice, decades of cultivating inner peace. And yet, in one unguarded instant, a tiny spark of pride was enough to pull him off center. This is not a story about failure. It is a story about how human we all are, even at our wisest. It is a story about the extraordinary power of those small inner movements, the ones that are so quick and so subtle that we barely notice them before they have already carried us somewhere we did not intend to go. And this is precisely why the ancient teachers valued equanimity so deeply. Not because they expected perfection, but because they understood how easily the mind can be tilted and how much depends on our ability to notice that tilting before it carries us away. The Zen tradition speaks of this with great tenderness. There is a saying, "Fall down 7 times, get up 8. The path is not about never losing our balance. It is about what we do in the moment we notice we have lost it. And before that, it is about developing the kind of gentle, steady awareness that allows us to notice sooner and sooner and sooner still. Until one day, perhaps, we notice the very first flicker, the way we might notice the first drop of rain before the storm arrives, and we can choose, with great kindness toward ourselves, not to be carried away. This is what the old master by the lake had done so beautifully for so many years. And this is what, in one brief and very human moment, he forgot. Not because he was weak, not because his practice had failed, but because he was human. And the teaching hidden in that moment, if we are willing to receive it gently, is that equanimity is not something we achieve once and then possess forever. It is something we return to again and again, with patience and with grace. The Buddha once said, "As a solid mass of rock is not stirred by the wind, so a sage is not moved by praise and blame." This is a beautiful image. Not a wall that blocks the wind, but a mountain that simply lets the wind pass through. The wind still blows. The mountain does not pretend otherwise, but the mountain does not move. This is equanimity, not the absence of experience, but a deep and steady presence within experience. A mind that can feel the wind without being carried away by it. And here is something that surprises many people when they first encounter this teaching. The ancient texts do not describe equanimity as something dull or flat or emotionless. In fact, quite the opposite. There is a passage in the old Buddhist scriptures that paints a remarkable picture of what the mind of equanimity actually looks and feels like. It asks us to imagine a master goldsmith at work. Let us imagine this together. Picture a quiet workshop, perhaps in a small village, in a time long ago. The room is warm. There is the soft glow of a furnace in the corner, and the air smells of charcoal and heated metal. A craftsman sits at a low table, working with great care and attention. Before him is a small crucible, and inside the crucible is gold. But it is not yet finished gold. It is raw, still carrying impurities, still mixed with lesser metals and fragments of stone. The craftsman's task is to refine it, to remove everything that is not gold, until only the pure essence remains. So he heats the crucible. He watches the gold begin to soften and glow. He blows gently on the flame to raise the temperature, then lets it cool slightly, sprinkling a few drops of water that hiss and evaporate in tiny clouds of steam. He examines the metal closely, turning it in the light, looking for flaws, for the faintest discoloration, for any sign of what does not belong. And then he heats it again, and cools it again, and examines it again, patiently, carefully, without rushing. There is no impatience in his hands. He has done this many times before, and he knows that the gold cannot be hurried. It reveals itself in its own time. Each cycle of heating and cooling removes another layer of impurity, another trace of what was never truly part of the gold to begin with. It was always there, the pure gold, hidden beneath what had gathered around it. The craftsman is not adding anything. He is simply helping the gold become what it already is. And slowly, gradually, the gold begins to change. It becomes smoother, brighter, more responsive, more alive in the craftsman's hands. And when the process is finally complete, what remains is something extraordinary. The gold is described in the old texts as pure and bright, pliant and malleable, luminous and flawless, free from all dross. It can be shaped into anything: a ring, a vessel, an ornament of great beauty. It has no resistance. It has no rigidity. It simply shines and responds. This, the ancient teachers tell us, is what the mind becomes when it is fully settled in equanimity. Not a dead thing, not a cold thing, but something luminous and infinitely responsive. A mind that is so free from the impurities of reactivity, so free from the dross of grasping and aversion, that it can meet any situation with clarity, with warmth, and with a kind of radiant availability. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because most of us, when we first hear the word equanimity, picture something rather grey. We imagine a person who does not react to anything, a person who sits very still and feels very little, a person who has traded passion and aliveness for a kind of emotional neutrality. But that is not what the tradition is pointing toward at all. Think about that gold in the crucible. It is not neutral. It is luminous. It is not rigid. It is pliant and responsive. It is not less than what it was before the refining process. It is more. It is the fullest, most complete version of itself. Everything that was covering its true nature has been gently, patiently removed. And what remains is pure radiance. The equanimous mind, according to this ancient tradition, is the most alive mind. It is the mind that sees most clearly, responds most appropriately, and loves most freely. Because it is not distorted by the pull of craving or the push of aversion. It is not clouded by the need to be right, or the fear of being wrong, or the desperate pursuit of comfort at all costs. It simply is, bright and open and ready. Now, you might wonder, if equanimity is so precious and so powerful, why is it so rare? Why do most of us spend our days being pulled this way and that by every passing mood, every stray comment, every small disappointment? The answer is simple, and it is not a judgment. It is rare because it is the last thing to develop. It is the fruit of a long and patient cultivation. In the Buddhist tradition, equanimity is placed at the very end of several important lists. It is the seventh of the 7 factors of awakening, the qualities that directly support liberation. It is the 4th of the 4 great forms of love, alongside kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy. And it is the 10th of the 10 perfections, the qualities of character that the tradition considers the highest development of a human being. Being last in these lists does not mean it is an afterthought. In this tradition, the last position is the position of honor. It is the pinnacle, the summit, the place where everything else has been leading. And there is a beautiful logic to this. Equanimity is not something you can simply decide to have, the way you might decide to be more organized or drink more water. It is something that arises naturally when certain other qualities have been cultivated and strengthened. It is what happens when generosity, integrity, patience, wisdom, and love have all been tended and nurtured over time. When those qualities are strong, the mind has so many points of stability that it naturally comes to rest. It does not need to be forced into stillness. It arrives there on its own. Think of it this way. If you have ever watched a spinning top in its final moments, you know that before it falls, there is a brief, beautiful phase where it is perfectly upright, perfectly still. All of the energy that was creating the spin has resolved itself into pure balance. That balance was not forced. It emerged from the movement that came before it. Equanimity is something like that. It is the natural resting point of a life that has been lived with care. Like the gold that has been refined through many patient cycles of heating and cooling. Like the mountain lake that is still because nothing is disturbing its depths. Like the spinning top that finds, for one luminous moment, perfect rest. There is another teaching the Buddha offered that touches this same truth. He observed that in all the world, in all of history, there has never been a person who was only praised and never criticized. And there has never been a person who was only criticized and never praised. This is simply the nature of things. The winds of opinion blow in every direction, and no one, no matter how wise or how foolish, is exempt. This is not a bitter teaching. It is a liberating one, because once we truly understand that praise and blame will always come and go, something in us can relax. We do not need to chase the one or flee from the other. We can simply let them pass, the way the mountain lets the wind pass. The way the deep lake lets the ripples on its surface come and go without disturbing the stillness far below. Think of how much energy we spend on any given day trying to earn approval or avoid criticism. Think of how much of our inner life is shaped by what we imagine others might be thinking of us. And then consider what it might feel like to set all of that down. Not to stop caring about people, not to become indifferent, but to simply stop letting the winds of opinion blow us from one emotional state to another, hour by hour, conversation by conversation. The Buddha described the wise person as one who, when touched by happiness and then by suffering, shows no signs of being elated or depressed. This does not mean that such a person feels nothing. It means that something deeper is holding them, something beneath the waves, a stillness that is not disturbed by the weather on the surface. And perhaps that is enough for now. Enough to plant a small seed. The seed of the possibility that there is a kind of peace available to us that does not depend on everything going well. A peace that does not require the world to be a certain way. A peace that lives inside us, luminous and quiet, waiting to be uncovered. Like gold in the crucible. Like the deep water beneath the surface of a mountain lake. Like the stillness at the very center of a spinning world. It has always been there, and it is here now, in this very moment, if we are willing to be still enough to feel it. Let us pause here for a moment. Notice how you are feeling right now. There is no right or wrong way to feel. Simply notice, and when you are ready, we will continue together. There is a well-known exchange from the old Buddhist records that goes something like this. A devoted practitioner, after many years of study and meditation, sent a poem to a wise teacher who lived across the river. The poem described his spiritual achievements in glowing terms. He felt he had become immovable, unshakable, beyond the reach of any worldly trouble. The teacher read the poem, smiled, and sent back a single word in reply. It was not a kind word. It was, in fact, quite rude. The practitioner was furious. He jumped into a boat, crossed the river, and stormed up to the teacher's door. "How could you write that?" he demanded. "After all my years of practice, after everything I have accomplished, you send me that?" The teacher looked at him calmly and said, "You told me that nothing in this world could move you, and yet one little word blew you all the way across the river. It is a funny story, and there is great warmth in it. But there is also a very honest teaching hiding inside, and it has everything to do with what we are exploring together tonight. The ancient teachers observed something about human life that is as true now as it was thousands of years ago. They noticed that there are certain forces in the world that push and pull at every human heart. Not physical forces, but emotional ones, inner ones. And they are so constant, so ever-present, that most of us do not even notice them. They are simply the water we swim in. The tradition came to call these forces the 8 worldly winds. They blow through every life, in every culture, in every era, and they come in pairs. There is the wind of gain and the wind of loss, the wind of pleasure and the wind of pain, the wind of praise and the wind of blame, and the wind of fame and the wind of obscurity. 4 pairs, 8 winds, always blowing, always shifting. And the question the ancient teachers were interested in was not how to stop the winds. You cannot stop the wind. The question was something more intimate than that. The question was, what happens inside us when they blow? Let us start with a pair that nearly every person alive will recognize: praise and blame. Let us explore a small story first. There was once a village where a certain farmer was known for raising very fine horses. One day, a wild horse wandered onto his land, and the villagers came to congratulate him on his good fortune. "What a wonderful thing," they said. "You have gained a beautiful horse." The farmer smiled gently and said, "Perhaps." A few days later, his son was riding the wild horse and took a bad fall, injuring his leg. The villagers came again, this time shaking their heads. "What a terrible thing," they said. "Your son is hurt." The farmer nodded and said, "Perhaps." The following week, the army came through the village, calling up all the young men to serve. But because the farmer's son was injured, he was passed over. The villagers returned once more, marveling at the farmer's good luck. And again, the farmer simply said, "Perhaps." This story has been told in many forms, in many traditions, for a very long time. And the reason it endures is that it captures something we all know to be true but find very difficult to live by. We do not know, in any given moment, whether what is happening is truly good or truly bad. We only know that it is happening. And yet the mind rushes to judge, to celebrate, to grieve, long before the full story has unfolded. Now, with that story resting gently in the background, imagine for a moment that you have spent a long time working on something that matters to you. Perhaps it is a project at work. Perhaps it is something you have made with your hands. Perhaps it is simply the way you have handled a difficult situation in your family. And one day, someone whose opinion you respect turns to you and says, "You did a really wonderful job with that. I am impressed." Notice what happens inside. There is a warmth, yes? A little glow. The chest lifts slightly. The shoulders drop. Something in you relaxes and expands at the same time. And if you watch closely, you might notice that the mind begins to replay the compliment. It savors it. It turns it over. They said wonderful. They said impressed. There is a quiet hum of satisfaction that can last for hours, sometimes days. And without realizing it, you begin to shape your next actions around the hope of hearing something like that again. Now imagine that the very next day, someone else says, with equal conviction, "I do not think you handled that well at all. I think you could have done much better." and just like that, the glow vanishes. In its place, a tightness, a contraction. The stomach clenches. The mind races. What did I do wrong? That is not fair. They do not understand. And this feeling too can linger for hours or days. It colors everything. It follows you into conversations that have nothing to do with what was said. It sits beside you at dinner. It is there when you try to sleep. 2 sentences, just a handful of words from 2 different people. And yet, together, they have the power to lift you to a peak and then drop you into a valley, all without your permission. This is the wind of praise and blame, and it is one of the most powerful forces in human life. The beautiful thing about the Buddhist teaching on the 8 winds is that it does not ask us to stop feeling. It does not say that praise should mean nothing to us, or that blame should bounce off us like rain off stone. That would not be human, and the tradition is deeply interested in what it means to be fully, honestly human. What the teaching invites us to notice is the difference between feeling something and being carried away by it. There is a moment, right at the beginning, when praise arrives or blame arrives, and we simply feel it. That moment is clean. It is honest. It is just life touching us, the way wind touches your skin. But then, almost immediately, something else happens. The mind grabs hold. It begins to build a story. With praise, the story is, I am good. I am worthy. I need more of this. With blame, the story is, I am failing. I am not enough. I must defend myself. And it is the story, not the original feeling, that carries us away. The ancient teachers compared this to a person picking up a hot coal. The first touch is just sensation, but then the hand closes around it, and that is when the real suffering begins. Not because the coal exists, but because we will not let go of it. The winds of pleasure and pain work in a very similar way, though they are often even more subtle because they operate so close to the body. There is a very natural, very innocent movement in every living creature toward what is pleasant and away from what is unpleasant. This is not a flaw. It is how we are made. It keeps us warm in winter and fed when we are hungry. There is nothing wrong with comfort. But the ancient teachers noticed that this movement, when it is not seen clearly, can quietly take over a life. The constant pursuit of the next pleasant experience, the constant avoidance of anything difficult or uncomfortable, a kind of restless shuttling back and forth that never quite arrives anywhere satisfying, because the moment one pleasure fades, the search for the next one begins. The Buddha once compared this to a person who is thirsty and drinks salt water. The first sip seems to help, but it only deepens the thirst. So you drink more, and the thirst deepens further, not because the water is bad, but because it was never the kind of water that could truly satisfy. This is not a teaching against enjoyment. The tradition is full of appreciation for beauty, for laughter, for the sweetness of a good meal or a kind word. The teaching is about something more subtle. It is about the difference between enjoying what is here and chasing what is next. Between resting in a pleasant moment and clutching at it as it passes. Let us explore a small, everyday scene to see what this looks like. Imagine a person sitting quietly at home in the evening. Everything is fine. Nothing is wrong. The house is warm. The day is done. And yet, a vague restlessness begins to stir. A feeling of something is missing. Not a large feeling. Not a dramatic one. Just a subtle sense of incompleteness, like an itch that cannot quite be located. So they open the cupboard and find something sweet to eat. For a moment, there is satisfaction. The restlessness eases. The world feels a little brighter. But 10 minutes later, the feeling returns. So they reach for their phone and begin scrolling through messages, looking for something interesting, something that will fill the space. Another brief moment of satisfaction. Another fading. Another search. Perhaps they turn on a show. Perhaps they pour a glass of something. Each time, the same small cycle. A reaching, a brief relief, a fading, and another reaching. This is not a dramatic suffering. It is a very ordinary one, but it is extraordinarily common. And over the course of a lifetime, it can leave a person feeling like they are always reaching for something just out of grasp. Always almost satisfied, but never quite at rest. Always moving, but never quite arriving. The wind of pleasure blows us toward what feels good. The wind of pain blows us away from what feels bad. And between the two of them, we can spend entire days, entire years, being blown back and forth without ever quite finding solid ground. The irony, as the ancient teachers gently pointed out, is that the solid ground was there all along. It was there in that first quiet moment of the evening, before the restlessness began. Before the reaching started, the peace was already present. We simply did not recognize it, because it was not exciting enough to catch our attention. And then there are the winds of gain and loss. We do not often think of gain and loss as emotional forces, but they are among the most powerful. The delight of acquiring something we wanted, whether it is a possession, an opportunity, or simply a piece of good news. And the ache of losing something we valued, whether it is a relationship, a role, a sense of security, or even just a favorite routine that has changed. There is a lightness that comes with gaining, and a heaviness that comes with losing. And most of us structure large portions of our lives around trying to gain more and lose less. We work for it. We worry about it. We lie awake at night calculating it. And all of this is perfectly understandable. It is simply what it means to be a person moving through a world that is always changing. But the teaching invites us to notice something specific about gain and loss. They are not permanent states. They are movements. A wave rises and a wave falls. What was gained yesterday may be lost tomorrow. What was lost last year may return in a form we did not expect. The ancient teachers were not being pessimistic about this. They were simply being honest. And in that honesty, there is a strange kind of freedom. Because if we can truly see that gain and loss are movements, not destinations, then we do not need to cling so tightly to the one or resist so fiercely the other. Think of the farmer in our story. Gain arrived. Then loss. Then what looked like gain once more. And through it all, his quiet perhaps was not indifference. It was spaciousness. It was the willingness to let the story keep unfolding without grasping at any single chapter and calling it the ending. There is a tenderness to this way of meeting life. It does not mean we stop caring about what we have or what we lose. It means we hold it all a little more lightly, the way you might hold a bird in your open palm. Firm enough that it feels safe, gentle enough that it can fly when it is ready. The last pair is fame and obscurity, or, to put it more gently, being known and being being overlooked. This one runs deep in many of us, deeper than we might like to admit. The wish to be seen, to be recognized, to matter in the eyes of others. It is not vanity, or at least, it is not only vanity. It is something more tender than that. It is the very human desire to feel that our life counts, that we are not invisible, that someone, somewhere, knows we are here. There is a story about a monk who spent many years in a small temple, tending the garden, sweeping the courtyard, preparing simple meals. He did this work quietly, day after day, without recognition or praise. One day, a traveler passed through and asked the abbot, "Who is your most accomplished student?" The abbot thought for a long moment and then pointed to the monk in the garden. The traveler was confused. "But he is just sweeping," the traveler said. "Yes," the abbot replied, "and he sweeps with his whole heart. That is why the garden is so peaceful." The monk had never sought to be known, and yet, in his quiet, wholehearted attention to his simple work, he had created something that touched everyone who entered that space. He did not need the wind of fame to fill his sails. He was already moving, gently and steadily, under his own power. And its opposite, the feeling of being overlooked, of being forgotten or unnoticed, can produce a quiet ache that is hard to name but very real. The ancient teachers did not judge this. They simply observed it, the way you might observe weather. They noticed how the mind puffs up when it feels recognized, and how it deflates when it feels unseen. And they invited their students to watch these movements with kindness and curiosity, rather than being helplessly swept along by them. Now, here is perhaps the most important part of this teaching, and it is very simple. The winds never stop blowing. They will not stop. As long as you are alive and moving through this world, there will be praise and there will be blame. There will be pleasant days and difficult days. There will be gain and there will be loss. This is not a problem to be solved. It is the weather of being human. What can change, and what the tradition so gently encourages, is our relationship to the winds. We cannot control whether someone praises us or criticizes us tomorrow. We cannot guarantee that what we love will not change. We cannot ensure that every day will be comfortable. But we can begin to notice how we respond. We can begin to feel the difference between the wind touching us and the mind grabbing hold of the wind and refusing to let go. And this noticing, this simple, patient awareness, is itself a form of equanimity. It is the beginning of it. Not the grand, perfected equanimity of the old masters. Just the small, honest equanimity of a person who is starting to pay attention. There is a beautiful image from the old texts. A deep lake. When the wind moves across the surface of a deep lake, there are ripples. Sometimes waves. The surface is disturbed. But beneath the surface, in the depths where the water is heavy and still, nothing moves at all. The disturbance is only on the surface. The depths remain clear and undisturbed. You have depths like that. Beneath the ripples of your daily reactions, beneath the surface movements of pleasure and discomfort, praise and criticism, there is something in you that is already still. You may have felt it at times, in a quiet moment before sleep, in the first seconds of waking, before the thoughts begin, in the middle of laughter, or during a walk in nature, when everything suddenly felt simple and whole. That depth is not something you need to create. It is already there. The winds do not reach it. They never have. They only stir the surface. The practitioner who crossed the river in a fury because of one small word had forgotten, in that moment, about his own depths. The word stirred his surface, and he believed the stirring was all there was. He forgot the stillness beneath. But the teacher, by provoking him so playfully, gave him a great gift. He showed him exactly where his work still was, not in writing more poems about being unshakable, but in learning to feel the wind, notice the ripple, and remember the depths. There is a verse attributed to the Buddha that captures this with great simplicity. Touched by happiness and then by suffering, the sage shows no sign of being elated or depressed. This does not describe someone who cannot feel. It describes someone who feels everything, but who is anchored in something deeper than the feeling. Someone who has found the still water beneath the surface and learned to rest there, even while the waves come and go above. And this resting, this quiet anchoring, is available to all of us, not as a far-off achievement, but as something we can touch, even briefly, in any moment where we are willing to pause and feel a little deeper than the surface. Let us pause here for a moment. Simply rest. Notice whatever is present for you right now. And when you feel ready, we will continue on together. In the Buddhist scriptures, there is a passage where the Buddha speaks about anger in a way that, once you hear it, is difficult to forget. He says, simply, that when you become angry with someone who has wronged you, you are doing that person a favor. Because the real harm of anger is not what it does to the person it is aimed at. The real harm is what it does to the one who carries it. Your adversary cannot make you feel the burning in your chest, cannot make your jaw tighten or your thoughts race at 3 a.m. Only anger can do that. And anger is something that is made from the inside, by you, within you. It is as if someone handed you a hot coal and you, rather than setting it down, chose to hold it tightly and wonder why your hand hurt. This is a teaching that meets us right where we live. Not on a mountaintop, not in a monastery, but right here, in the middle of our ordinary days, where we are constantly encountering situations that invite us to react. And it leads us into one of the most practical and tender aspects of what we have been exploring together tonight. It leads us to a question that is as old as human life itself. When pain arrives at our door, what do we do with it? Let us explore a story, a very ordinary one, because the most important truths usually live in ordinary places. It is late afternoon. A woman is driving home from work after a long day. She is tired. Her shoulders ache. All she wants is to get home, sit down, and have a quiet cup of tea. The road is crowded, the traffic thick and slow. She is patient. She is doing fine. Then, out of nowhere, another car cuts sharply in front of her. She brakes hard. Her heart jumps. Her hands grip the steering wheel. And the other driver does not even seem to notice. They simply speed ahead, weaving between cars as if no one else exists. Something flares in her chest. A hot, tight feeling. She feels her jaw clench. How could they? That was dangerous. That was rude. The words cycle through her mind, gaining speed, gaining heat. She replays the moment. She imagines what she would have said if the other driver could hear her. By the time she arrives home, The incident is 10 minutes behind her, but the feeling has not faded. If anything, it has grown. It has settled into her body like a weight. She walks through the front door carrying it with her, and when her young child runs up to greet her, full of excitement about something that happened at school, she hears herself say, more sharply than she intended, "Not right now. Give me a minute." The child's face changes, just slightly. A small dimming. The light that was there a moment ago, that eager, open brightness, fades. And the child goes quiet and walks away to another room. Now, let us follow this thread just a little further. Because the story does not end in the kitchen. That child, carrying the sting of those sharp words, sits alone for a while, feeling confused and a little sad. The next morning at school, when a friend accidentally bumps into them in the hallway, the child snaps at the friend more harshly than the situation calls for. And the friend, startled and hurt, withdraws. And on it goes. Let us pause and look at what has happened here. A stranger on a road did something careless. That carelessness produced a flash of fear and anger in the woman. She held on to that anger, carried it with her, and without meaning to, passed it along to her child. The child, feeling the sting of the sharp words, may carry that heaviness into the rest of the evening, perhaps into a restless night, perhaps into the next day at school, where a small unkindness toward a friend might ripple outward once more. This is how pain travels through the world. Not in the grand, dramatic ways we usually imagine, but in these small, almost invisible transfers. One person absorbs a hurt. It lives in them for a while, coloring their mood, tightening their body, shortening their patience. And then, at a vulnerable moment, it spills over into someone else's life. And on it goes. From the stranger on the road, through the mother, to the child, to the friend at school, and outward in directions none of them will ever trace. We have all been part of chains like this. We have all been the person who carried something home and let it spill. And we have all been the child, or the friend, or the colleague who received someone else's overflow and wondered what we had done wrong. There is no blame in this recognition. It is simply the way things work when we are not yet awake to the pattern. The ancient teachers saw this chain very clearly. They understood that every moment of unchecked reactivity is a link in a chain that extends outward in all directions. And they also understood something beautiful and deeply hopeful, that the chain can be broken, that any one of us, at any point, can choose not to pass the pain along, not by being superhuman, not by suppressing what we feel, but simply by noticing, in the moment, what is happening inside us and choosing, with whatever gentleness we can muster, to set the weight down rather than hand it to the next person we meet. This is one of the most generous things a person can do in this world. It does not require great spiritual attainment. It does not require years of practice. It simply requires a moment of awareness. A moment where, instead of gripping the hot coal, we notice that we are holding it. And we set it down. The woman in the car could not have prevented the other driver from cutting her off. That was out of her control. But the moment after, the moment where the anger arrived and began to build its story, that was where a choice lived. Not a perfect choice, not an easy choice, but a real one. And this is the teaching. Not that we should never feel anger or frustration or hurt. These are natural human responses, and there is nothing wrong with feeling them. The teaching is about what happens next. Do we hold on? Do we feed the feeling with stories and replays and imagined confrontations? Or do we, even imperfectly, even slowly, begin to loosen our grip? There is another story from the Buddhist tradition that speaks to this in a slightly different way. A teacher was sitting with a group of students when a man approached and began speaking to the teacher in a very harsh and disrespectful manner. He was clearly upset about something, and he poured his frustration out in the form of insults and accusations. The students were uncomfortable. Some were angry on their teacher's behalf. They looked to the teacher to see how he would respond. The teacher listened quietly until the man had finished. Then he asked a gentle question. If someone offers you a gift and you choose not to accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The man was confused. Well, it would still belong to the person who offered it, he said. The teacher nodded. It is the same with your anger and your harsh words. You have offered them to me, but I have chosen not to accept them. So they remain yours. There was a long silence, and in that silence, something shifted. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. The man's shoulders, which had been raised and tight, began to soften. The heat in his face began to fade. He had thrown his pain outward, as people do, and for the first time in a long while, it had not landed. No one had thrown it back. No one had absorbed it and suffered from it. It was simply still there, in his own hands, waiting to be set down. And perhaps, in that quiet moment, he began to set it down. We do not know how the story ends. The tradition does not tell us, but the image stays with us, because we have all been both people in that scene. We have been the one hurling our pain outward, hoping it would feel better if someone else carried it for a while. And we have been the one on the receiving end, wondering how to respond. This story is often told as an example of great wisdom, and it is. But there is something important to notice about it that goes beyond cleverness. The teacher did not deflect the anger. He did not throw it back. He did not build a wall against it. He simply did not pick it up. There is a real difference between these responses, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. When we deflect, we are still engaged with the anger. We are using force to push it away, and that force has a cost. When we throw anger back, we become part of the chain, adding our own link. When we build a wall, we protect ourselves, but we also cut ourselves off from the world, and something in us hardens. But when we simply do not pick it up, something else happens. The anger, having nowhere to land, begins to lose its power. It is like a wave that reaches the shore, and finding only soft, open sand, spreads itself thin and dissolves. There is no crash, no collision. The energy simply disperses. Think of a stone dropped into a still pond. If the stone hits a wall, it bounces back, creating more disturbance. If it hits another stone, the collision sends both stones careening. But if the stone simply sinks into soft, deep water, the pond absorbs it. There are ripples, yes, but they are gentle and they fade quickly, and the pond returns to stillness. To be that soft, deep water, that is what equanimity looks like when it meets the pain of the world. Not rigid, not armored, soft and deep and still enough to absorb what comes without being permanently disturbed by it. This is equanimity in action. Not a cold indifference, not a gritting of the teeth, but a warm, open spaciousness that allows difficult things to pass through without causing lasting harm. It is, in its own quiet way, one of the most powerful things a human being can do. And here is what makes this teaching so gentle and so hopeful. You do not need to be able to do this perfectly. Nobody does it perfectly. The woman in the car, the one who spoke sharply to her child, she is not a failure. She is a human being who was carrying something heavy and did not notice in time. That happens. It happens to all of us. But the next time, perhaps, she notices a little sooner. Perhaps she feels the tightness in her chest while she is still in the car and takes one slow breath. Perhaps she notices the story the mind is building, the imagined confrontations, the righteous speeches, and she gently says to herself, "I am carrying something that is not mine." Perhaps she rolls down the window and lets the cool air touch her face. Perhaps she arrives home and, before she opens the door, she stands on the step for just a moment, feeling her feet on the ground, feeling the evening air, and choosing to leave the weight of the drive outside. And then she opens the door. And when her child comes running up, full of excitement and stories, she is able to kneel down, look into those bright eyes, and say, "Tell me everything." In that one small choice, a chain is broken. The pain that began with a stranger's carelessness on a busy road stops here, on this doorstep, in this pause. It does not reach the child. It does not travel into the next day or the next interaction. It simply dissolves, like a wave meeting soft sand. The Buddha said that hatred is never ended by hatred. Only by love is it ended. This is an ancient and unchanging truth. And it begins not with grand acts of love, but with these small, quiet moments where we choose not to add to the world's burden of pain. There is one more layer to this teaching that deserves our attention, and it has to do with understanding. When someone directs their frustration or anger toward us, it is very easy to take it personally. It feels personal. It is aimed at us, after all. Our name is on it. And the mind, with its quick and protective instincts, immediately begins to build a case. How could they? What did I do to deserve that? They are wrong, and I am right. But the ancient teachers invited us to consider something else. To consider that in most cases, the person who is directing their pain at us is not really responding to us at all. They are responding to something much older and much larger. Their own accumulated suffering, their own unhealed wounds, their own fears and disappointments and exhaustion. This does not mean we must accept harmful behavior. It does not mean we should not protect ourselves when that is necessary. Equanimity is not passivity. It is not a doormat. It is a deep and steady clarity that allows us to respond wisely rather than react blindly. But when we can see, even for a moment, that the person in front of us is struggling, that their harshness is really a cry from their own pain, something in us shifts. The need to defend softens. The urge to retaliate fades. And in its place, there may arise something unexpected, a quiet understanding, perhaps even compassion. It is like looking at a person shivering in the cold and suddenly understanding that their sharp words a moment ago were not about you at all. They were about the cold. They were about exhaustion. They were about a hard day and an empty tank. And that understanding does not excuse the sharpness, but it changes what it means to you. It gives you room to respond rather than react. It gives you room to be generous, even when generosity was not offered to you first. And this is where equanimity and love begin to intertwine. Because when we are no longer caught in our own reactivity, when the mind is steady enough to see clearly, we often discover that the most natural response to another person's suffering is not anger or judgment. It is kindness. It was there all along, beneath the surface, waiting for a still enough moment to be felt. So tonight, as you rest, consider this. Every day, in ways large and small, life offers us moments where we can either pick up the coal or let it lie. We can either add a link to the chain or let the chain end with us. These are not dramatic moments, usually. They do not feel heroic. They happen in cars, in kitchens, in hallways, in the space between reading a message and typing a reply. But each one matters. Each one ripples outward, just as each act of reactivity ripples outward. The difference is that these quiet choices, these moments of not picking up what does not belong to us, ripple outward as peace, as spaciousness, as a kind of kindness that the people around us may never trace back to its source, but will feel nonetheless. There is a Zen saying, "The whole moon and the entire sky are reflected in one dewdrop on the grass." Every small moment of equanimity, every time we choose not to pass the pain along, reflects something much larger. It reflects a vision of what the world could be if more of us, more often, were willing to pause on the doorstep, to take one breath, to let the wave dissolve in soft sand. That is a beautiful way to move through the world. And it begins, as so many beautiful things do, with simply noticing what we are holding and gently, kindly opening our hands. Let us pause here. Let everything settle, like dust returning to the ground after a gentle rain. And whenever you are ready, we will continue on together. A long time ago, a student asked a Buddhist teacher a question that many of us have quietly wondered about ourselves. "How do I find lasting peace?" the student asked. "I have tried sitting in stillness. I have tried watching my breath. But the moment I return to my daily life, the peace slips away. What am I missing?" The teacher was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You are trying to build a roof without walls. You are trying to build walls without a foundation. Go back. Start with the ground." The student looked puzzled. "But I thought meditation was the ground," he said. The teacher shook her head gently. "Meditation is the garden. But before you can grow anything in a garden, you must first prepare the soil. You must clear the stones and enrich the earth. Otherwise, no matter how carefully you plant, nothing will take root." This small exchange points to something that the Buddhist tradition has understood for a very long time, and it is something that we, in our modern hunger for quick results, often overlook. The deepest peace, the kind of equanimity we have been exploring together tonight, does not come from any single technique. It does not arrive because we found the right meditation app or read the right book or attended the right retreat. It comes from something slower, something quieter, something more ordinary than all of that. It comes from the patient cultivation of character. Now, that might sound old-fashioned. Character. It is a word that belongs to a different era, perhaps. A word your grandmother might have used. But the Buddhist tradition takes it very seriously, and it offers a remarkably detailed map of what a well-cultivated character looks like. This map is called the 10 perfections. And these 10 qualities, developed together over the course of a life, are said to create a foundation so strong, so deeply rooted, that the mind naturally comes to rest. Not because it has been forced into stillness, but because it has nowhere left to wobble. Let us walk through them together, not as a list to be memorized, but as a journey, because that is what they are, a journey that each of us is already on, whether we know it or not. The journey begins with generosity. Not generosity as a grand gesture, though it can be that, but generosity as a way of being, a disposition, an orientation of the heart that is turned outward, toward others, toward sharing what we have. There is a story told in many parts of Asia about an old woman who lived at the edge of a village. She had very little, a small house, a modest garden, barely enough to feed herself. But every evening, she would place a bowl of rice and a cup of water outside her door. When her neighbors asked who it was for, she said, "For whoever needs it." Some nights, a traveler passing through the village would find the bowl and eat gratefully. Some nights, a stray animal would come. Some nights, the rice sat untouched, and she would scatter it among the birds in the morning. She never checked. She never kept count. She simply gave what she had, quietly and without expectation. Over time, something began to happen that the old woman herself might not have noticed. The people in the village, seeing her small nightly offering, began to feel something stir in their own hearts. A neighbor started leaving a bundle of firewood by her door in winter. Another began sharing vegetables from their garden. The village, without anyone organizing it or announcing it, became a kinder place. Not because of some great campaign for kindness, but because one person's quiet generosity had changed the temperature of the air. This is what the tradition means when it says generosity is the first perfection. It is the first movement away from the small, contracted world of me and mine toward the larger world of us. And that movement, that opening, is where the whole journey begins. The second quality is integrity. The old texts sometimes call this virtue or ethical conduct, but the heart of it is simpler than that. It is the commitment not to cause harm, to be careful with our words, our actions, and our choices so that we do not add to the suffering in the world. There is a saying from the tradition, "Before you speak, let your words pass through 3 gates. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind?" These 3 gates are a beautiful distillation of what integrity looks like in daily life. Not rigid rule following, not anxious perfectionism, just a gentle, steady attentiveness to the impact of what we do and say. And here is something important about integrity that the tradition emphasizes. It is not just about our outward behavior. It is about the inner ground we stand on. When our ethical life is clear and untroubled, when we are not carrying secrets or regrets, or the weight of things we know we should not have done, there is a quietness in the mind that is hard to achieve any other way. It is like the difference between trying to sleep in a clean, tidy room and trying to sleep in a room full of clutter. The outer order creates an inner ease. There is a small story about this that carries a surprising amount of weight. Imagine a person who receives a payment they were not expecting. Perhaps a refund, or a reimbursement, or some small amount of money that was sent in error. It is not much. A few coins. Nobody would notice if they simply kept it. Nobody would care. And yet, something inside them pauses. a small, quiet voice that says, "This is not mine." That pause is integrity speaking. It is not dramatic. It will not make the evening news. But in that pause, the whole ethical foundation of a life is quietly maintained. And the person who honors that pause, who returns the few coins or corrects the small error, sleeps a little more soundly that night. Their inner ground is solid, and from solid ground, everything else can be built with confidence. This is why integrity is placed so early in the journey. It is the foundation. Without it, everything built on top is unsteady. The third quality is renunciation, which is really just a beautiful word for letting go. We all carry things that are too heavy for us. Grudges that we have been nursing for years. Worries about things we cannot control. Old stories about who we are and what we deserve. Attachments to the way things used to be or the way we wish they were. Letting go does not mean we stop caring. It means we stop clutching. There is a lovely image sometimes used in the East of a monkey trap. A hunter places a piece of fruit inside a hollow gourd with a small opening. The monkey reaches in, grabs the fruit, and finds that its clenched fist is now too large to pull back through the opening. The monkey is trapped, not by the gourd, but by its own unwillingness to let go of the fruit. We smile at the monkey. But how many of us are holding on to our own version of the fruit? How many of us are trapped, not by our circumstances, but by what we refuse to release? Perhaps it is an old argument that we replay in our heads, even years after it happened. Perhaps it is an idea of who we should have become by now. Perhaps it is a relationship that has changed, and we keep reaching for the version of it that no longer exists. The grasping itself has become so familiar that we have forgotten there was ever a time before it. We have forgotten what our hand felt like when it was open. The perfection of letting go is the growing ability to notice when we are clutching and to gently, kindly open our hand. Not all at once, not everything at once, but one thing at a time, as we are ready. And each time we let go of something that was too heavy for us, we discover that what replaces it is not emptiness. It is spaciousness. It is room to breathe, room for something new and unexpected to arrive. The fourth quality is wisdom. And in this tradition, wisdom does not mean being clever or well-read. It means something much more intimate. It means the ability to see clearly, to look at a situation, at a feeling, at a pattern in our own mind, and to understand what is really happening beneath the surface. Wisdom is what tells us when it is time to let go and when it is time to hold on. It is what helps us see the difference between a situation that needs our action and a situation that needs our patience. It is the quiet inner voice that says, not everything that feels urgent is important. Not everything that feels frightening is dangerous. The fifth quality is effort, or perhaps a better word is dedication. The willingness to show up day after day for the things that matter, not with grim determination, but with a kind of cheerful persistence. The way a gardener shows up to tend the garden, not because any single day of watering will transform it, but because 1,000 days of small, faithful attention will. There is something quietly heroic about this kind of effort. It does not make headlines. Nobody applauds you for getting up a little earlier, or for choosing the kinder response when you are tired, or for trying again after a disappointment. But this is the effort that actually changes a life, not the dramatic burst of willpower that flames out after a week, but but the gentle, steady returning, day after day, to what matters most. And the sixth, arriving right alongside effort like a companion on the road, is patience. Because effort without patience is like a fire without a hearth. It burns hot but burns out fast. Patience is what allows us to keep going when the results are not yet visible, to trust the process even when we cannot see where it is leading. Anyone who has ever planted a seed knows what patience feels like. You water the soil. You wait. Nothing visible happens. You water again. You wait again. And there is a moment, usually right before you are about to give up, where a small green shoot appears. And you realize that something was happening all along, beneath the surface, in the dark, where you could not see it. This is what patience protects. It protects the invisible work. The Buddha is said to have remarked that patience is the highest form of practice. And anyone who has ever tried to change a deep habit, or to heal a long wound, or to build something that truly lasts, knows exactly why. The seventh quality is truthfulness. Living in harmony with what is real. Not just speaking honestly, though that is part of it, but aligning our whole life with what we know in our hearts to be true. This takes courage, because the truth is not always convenient, and it does not always make us popular. But there is a particular kind of peace that comes from living a life that is not divided against itself. A life where what we say and what we do and what we feel are all moving in the same direction. You know the feeling of speaking a truth that you had been avoiding. There is a moment of fear beforehand, a tightening, and then, once the words are out, a release, a settling, as if some tension that had been living in your body for a long time has finally been allowed to leave. That release is what truthfulness feels like from the inside. It is the body and mind coming back into alignment, like a bone that has been gently set back into its proper place. The eighth quality is resolve, determination, the quiet inner commitment that says, "This is what matters to me, and I am going to follow through." Resolve is different from stubbornness. Stubbornness grips tightly and refuses to adapt. Resolve holds gently, but does not let go. It is the steady hand on the tiller, keeping the boat on course through changing weather. There is a story sometimes told about a traveler making a long journey on foot across a wide and featureless plain. Day after day, the landscape looked the same. There were no landmarks, no signs of progress. Many travelers gave up and turned back, convinced they were going in circles. But this traveler had a resolve that was quiet and deep. Each morning, she looked at the horizon, chose a direction, and walked. She did not know how far it was. She did not know what she would find. But she had made a commitment to keep going, and so she did. And one morning, after many days, the plain began to change. Grass appeared, then flowers, then the sound of water. And she understood that the journey had been working all along, even when she could not see it. The ninth quality is loving kindness, the warmth of a heart that genuinely wishes well for others. Not just the people we like, not just the people who are easy to love, but all beings, everywhere, including ourselves. There is a phrase from the old loving kindness prayers that captures this beautifully. May all beings be happy. May all beings be at peace. May all beings be free from suffering. These are not just words to be recited. They are an orientation to be lived, a direction for the heart to face. Imagine for a moment what it would feel like to walk through your day with this orientation, passing a stranger on the street and silently, almost without thinking, wishing them well, sitting across from a difficult colleague and, beneath whatever frustration you might feel, holding a quiet hope that they too find some peace, standing in a crowded place and feeling not the usual irritation or impatience, but a gentle awareness that every person around you is carrying something, hoping for something, doing their best with what they have. This is not sentimental, it is radical, and it changes everything about how the world feels to the person who practices it. Loving kindness, when it is genuine and well developed, has a remarkable effect on equanimity. Because when the heart is warm, when it is genuinely wishing well for the people around it, it becomes very difficult for irritation and resentment and judgment to take hold. They simply do not have room. The space is already occupied by something gentler and more alive. And then, the 10th, equanimity itself. The tradition places it last not because it is an afterthought, but because it is what all the others have been building toward. It is the roof that shelters everything beneath it. When generosity is strong, and integrity is solid, and the heart has learned to let go, and wisdom sees clearly, and effort persists with patience, and truth guides us, and resolve holds steady, and loving kindness fills the spaces between, then equanimity arises on its own, naturally, without force, like the sun appearing when the clouds have cleared. Each of these 9 qualities is like a root beneath a great tree. The more roots there are, the deeper they go, the less likely the tree is to be blown over in a storm. And equanimity is the quality of standing steady in any weather. Not because we are rigid or immovable, but because we are so deeply rooted that the winds simply cannot reach the place where our stillness lives. There is a verse from the Dhammapada, one of the oldest Buddhist texts, that says, "Just as a solid rock is not shaken by the storm, even so the wise are not affected by praise or blame." When we hear this, we might picture someone cold and unfeeling. But now, having walked through these 10 qualities together, perhaps a different picture comes to mind. A person whose steadiness comes not from hardness but from fullness. A heart so rich with generosity, so grounded in integrity, so patient and warm and honest, that there is simply no room left for the old reactivity. The storms still come, the praise still arrives, and the blame still arrives. But the tree stands, swaying gently perhaps, but never falling, because its roots reach deep into good soil. This is what the ancient tradition means when it speaks of perfection. Not flawlessness, not some impossible standard that we will never reach, but a fullness, a completeness, a life lived with such care and attention and warmth that the heart, in the end, naturally comes to rest. And here is the most encouraging part of all of this. You do not need to master all 10 qualities before any of them begin to help. Every act of generosity, no matter how small, adds a root. Every moment of patience, every choice to be truthful, every time you release something you were holding too tightly, the foundation grows a little stronger. The ground beneath you becomes a little more solid. You are already on this journey. You have been on it for as long as you have been alive. Every kindness you have offered, every difficulty you have faced with grace, every time you have forgiven someone, or told the truth, or simply shown up when it would have been easier not to, all of it counts. All of it has been building something inside you that is stronger and more beautiful than you may realize. The 10 perfections are not a distant ideal. They are a description of what you are already becoming. One small, quiet choice at a time. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the breath come easily. And when you are ready, we will continue together. There is a Zen story about a young person who traveled a great distance to study with a renowned teacher. The journey had taken many weeks. The young person had crossed rivers and mountain passes, had slept in roadside shelters, and eaten what little food they could carry. They had left behind their family, their home, their familiar life, all because they had heard that this teacher could show them the way to peace. When they finally arrived at the teacher's door, dusty and exhausted from the journey, they bowed and said, "I have come to learn the way. Please teach me." The teacher looked at them kindly. He did not seem impressed by the distance traveled or the sacrifices made. He simply asked, "Have you eaten?" "No," the student replied. "I came straight here. I did not want to waste a single moment." "Then go and eat your rice," the teacher said. "And when you are done, wash your bowl." The student was confused. They had expected a teaching, a revelation, something to match the magnitude of their journey. Instead, they were told to eat and wash a bowl. But it is said that in this simple instruction, the entire teaching was already present. It just takes time to understand why. The teacher was not being dismissive. He was pointing to something that our hurrying minds so easily miss. That preparation is not separate from the path. It is the path. That how we wash the bowl, how we eat the meal, how we tend to the ordinary, unglamorous details of our lives, this is where the real work begins. Not someday. Not after we have arrived at some lofty attainment, but right here, in the most common moments of a common day. With that spirit in mind, let us explore a story that touches something very tender about how we relate to our own readiness. Many years ago, a group of people gathered regularly to study ancient Buddhist texts together. They met in a small room, perhaps once a week, to read and discuss and question. Most of them had come to their spiritual practice as adults. They had discovered meditation and Buddhist teachings later in life, and they had jumped in with great enthusiasm. They sat every morning. They attended retreats. They read widely. They were sincere and eager, and their practice was genuine. Among them was a woman whose background was very different from the others. She had not come to Buddhism as an adult discovery. She had grown up inside it. It had shaped her entire childhood, her education, her sense of the world. The teachings were not something she had found. They were the air she had always breathed. This woman was deeply devoted. She had left a successful career in order to devote herself more fully to Buddhist study. She had a teacher she trusted. She had reorganized her entire life around this path. Everyone in the room could see how committed she was, how carefully she lived, how deeply she cared. One day, the person leading the study group asked her a simple question. "Do you meditate?" It was a casual question, an easy one. In that room, everyone meditated. It was assumed. It was the starting point. The first thing anyone did. The woman paused, and then she gave an answer that silenced the room. "Not yet," she said quietly. "I am waiting until I am worthy." Nobody spoke for a long moment. The room was very still. And in that stillness, You could feel something shifting in the people who were listening, a door opening somewhere inside them that they did not know was there. Let that land for a moment. Not yet. I am waiting until I am worthy. Here was a woman who had given up a thriving career to devote her life to these teachings. A woman whose ethical care and sincerity were visible to everyone around her. And she did not feel ready yet for what everyone else in the room had done as their very first step. Not because she thought less of herself, but because she thought so much of the practice. She held it in such high regard that she wanted to come to it properly. With clean hands, with a prepared heart, with the kind of reverence that most of us, in our eagerness to get started, skip right past. In a culture that tells us to move fast, to jump in, to start before we are ready, to launch before we are prepared, this woman chose to wait. Not out of fear, not out of self-doubt, but out of a deep and quiet respect for something she loved. The people in the room were struck by this. Some of them had been meditating for years and had never once considered whether they were worthy of the practice. They had simply begun, and there is nothing wrong with that. Beginning is good. Beginning is necessary. But there was something in this woman's answer that opened a door in their minds. A door to a very different way of thinking about the spiritual life. What if readiness matters? What if the quality of the ground we stand on affects the depth of everything we build on top of it? What if some of the restlessness we feel in our practice, some of the frustration when the mind will not settle, comes not from doing it wrong, but from having skipped a step, from having rushed past the preparation in our eagerness to arrive? There is a beautiful image that comes to mind here. A gardener who has just received a packet of rare and precious seeds. These seeds are capable of growing into something extraordinary, but only under the right conditions. They need soil that has been carefully prepared. They need a certain depth, a certain richness, a certain freedom from rocks and weeds. Now, the gardener could simply tear open the packet and scatter the seeds on the ground as it is. Some might grow. Most would not. The soil is too hard, too cluttered, too shallow for roots to take hold. Or the gardener could do something else entirely. She could set the seeds aside, gently and with care, and spend a whole season preparing the earth, turning it over with slow, patient hands, enriching it with compost and leaf mold, removing the stones one by one, each one pulled from the dark soil and set aside, pulling the weeds that would compete for light and water, working the earth until it is dark and soft and alive with possibility, until it crumbles gently between her fingers and smells of rain. To anyone passing by, the garden would look empty. Nothing growing, nothing blooming. Just a person kneeling in the dirt, day after day, with no visible results to show for it. A neighbor might lean over the fence and say, "When are you going to plant something?" And the gardener would smile and say, "Soon. The soil is almost ready." But the gardener knows something the neighbor does not. She knows that everything that matters is happening right now, in this unglamorous, invisible work. And when the season is right, when the soil is deep and rich and welcoming, the seeds will go in. And they will grow with a strength and a beauty that would not have been possible without all of this quiet preparation. The roots will reach deep because there is depth to reach into. The stems will stand straight because the ground is firm. The blossoms will last because they are drawing from something real. This is what the woman in the study group understood in her bones. She was preparing the soil, and she was not in a hurry, because she knew that the soil cannot be rushed. You cannot command earth to be fertile. You can only tend it faithfully and wait. There is a Zen saying that captures something of this spirit. You should sit in meditation for 20 minutes every day. Unless you are too busy, then you should sit for an hour. On the surface, it sounds like a joke. But underneath the humor, there is a serious point. The more hurried we are, the more we need to slow down. The more we feel we are not ready, the more we need the very thing we think we are not ready for. And yet, the woman's answer was not wrong either. Because sometimes what we need most is not to push harder, but to tend more carefully to what is already here. To the way we speak to the people we love. To the small ethical choices we make when no one is watching. To the quiet work of becoming the kind of person who can receive what the practice has to offer. Both paths are true. The path of jumping in and learning as you go, and the path of patient preparation, of tending the ground, of waiting until you are ready. The tradition holds space for both. What matters is not which path you choose, but that you walk it with sincerity. Let us explore a brief story about the other path, to honor both ways. There was once a person who had never meditated a day in their life. They knew nothing about Buddhism or spiritual practice. But one afternoon, after a particularly difficult week, they found themselves sitting in a park, and something in them simply stopped. The running, the planning, the worrying. For a few minutes, without intending it, they just sat there and breathed. And in that unplanned, unrehearsed stillness, they felt something they had not felt in a very long time. A sense of being okay. Not happy, exactly. Not excited. Just okay. Settled. Present. They did not know that they were, in that moment, tasting equanimity. They had not prepared for it. They had not earned it through years of ethical cultivation. It simply arrived, as grace sometimes does, when the mind was too tired to keep running. And that experience mattered. It was real. It planted a seed. Perhaps later, that person would begin to wonder how to make that feeling more available. Perhaps they would begin to tend their garden after all. So we see that the two paths are not as separate as they might seem. Sometimes we prepare the soil and then the rain comes. Sometimes the rain comes first and we realize we need to tend the soil. The important thing is that both the tending and the receiving are honored. That we do not skip the preparation out of impatience, and we do not delay the beginning out of fear. There is another layer to this story that is worth sitting with, and it has to do with the relationship between our inner life and our outer life. The woman was not just studying texts. She was living her ethics. She was paying attention to how she treated people, how she earned her livelihood, how she used her words. She was building, brick by brick, an inner structure of integrity and care. And she understood that this inner structure would be the container for everything that came later. The deeper practices, the subtler insights, the moments of real stillness, all of these would need somewhere to land. And if the container was cracked, or cluttered, or not yet finished, even the most beautiful experiences would simply leak away. Think about this in your own life for a moment. Not with judgment, just with gentle curiosity. Have you ever had a moment of real peace, perhaps during a walk in nature, or while watching a sunset, or in a quiet moment with someone you love, only to have it evaporate almost immediately because some worry or resentment or unresolved difficulty was waiting in the wings? The peace was real. You could feel it. For a few moments, everything was simple and whole. But then the mind reached for its familiar concerns, and the peace drained away like water through a cracked bowl. There is a traditional image from the Buddhist teachings about this. The Buddha compared the unprepared mind to a pot with a hole in the bottom. You can pour the most precious water into it, the most nourishing teachings, the most beautiful experiences, the deepest moments of stillness. But if the pot has a hole, nothing stays. It all drains away, and we are left wondering why, after so many efforts, we still feel empty. But a pot without a hole, a vessel that has been cared for and mended and made whole, that pot can receive the water and hold it. The water fills the space and stays. And over time, the vessel becomes so full that it begins to overflow, and the people around it are nourished too, without even knowing where the nourishment is coming from. This is what the cultivation of character does. It mends the pot. It builds the container. Generosity widens it. Integrity strengthens it. Patience deepens it. Truth seals the cracks. And when the vessel is strong and wide and deep enough, the peace that arrives does not leak away. It stays. It fills the space. It becomes a kind of inner well-being that is not dependent on everything going right, but is present even when things are difficult. This is equanimity, once again, showing itself not as something we force into existence, but as something that naturally fills a well-prepared space. The woman in the study group eventually did begin to meditate. The story does not tell us exactly when or what prompted her to feel ready. Perhaps there was a morning when she woke up and felt the ground beneath her was finally solid enough. Perhaps her teacher told her it was time. Or perhaps, after all those years of patient preparation, the practice simply began on its own, the way a ripe fruit falls from the tree without anyone shaking the branch. What we do know is that her waiting was not wasted time. It was, in its own way, the deepest practice of all. It was the practice of humility, of reverence, of trusting that some things cannot be hurried. It was the practice of caring enough about something to prepare yourself to receive it well. And perhaps, tonight, there is something comforting in this idea, that wherever you are in your own journey, whatever you feel ready for and whatever you do not, the preparation counts. The quiet, invisible work of becoming a kinder, more honest, more patient person, this is not a detour from the path. It is the path itself. Every small choice, every moment of care, every time you pause and choose the gentler response, you are preparing the soil. You are building the container. You are making yourself ready, whether you realize it or not, for something beautiful to take root. And here is something else that is worth carrying with you. The woman in the study group was not wrong to wait, but she was also, in her waiting, already practicing. Her patience was practice. Her ethical care was practice. Her reverence was practice. She thought she had not yet begun, but in truth, she had been on the path for years. She simply could not see it from the inside. It may be the same for you. You may feel that you are not far along, that you have not done enough or learned enough or changed enough. But from where we are sitting together tonight, looking at your life with gentle eyes, we might see it differently. We might see that every difficulty you have met with grace, every temptation you have resisted, every time you have chosen kindness over convenience, has been preparing you for something, has been deepening the soil, has been mending the bowl. There is no rush. The seeds are patient. The soil is patient. And the gardener, when she finally kneels to plant, will find that the ground has been waiting for her all along. Let us pause gently here. Let the breath settle. And when you are ready, we will continue together. Picture, if you will, two people standing at the edge of the same storm. The sky has turned dark. The air has that particular heaviness that comes just before rain. You can smell it, that clean, electric smell of weather about to change. And then the wind arrives. Not gently, but all at once, bending the trees, sending leaves spiraling upward, pressing against anything that dares to stand. The first person has spent years building physical strength and endurance. They are rooted in their body. Their feet are planted wide, their center of gravity low, their muscles accustomed to holding firm. When the wind comes, they lean into it. They feel it push against them, and they push back, not aggressively, but with a quiet, almost effortless stability. Their body knows how to stand. It has practiced standing for a long time. The wind presses and presses, and they simply remain, the way a boulder remains in a riverbed while the current flows around it. The second person is not particularly strong. Their body is ordinary, but they have something else. They have seen storms before, many storms, and they have come to understand something about storms that most people miss. They know that the wind always passes. They know that the strongest gusts come in waves, and that between the waves there are moments of surprising calm. They know that the darkest clouds are often the thinnest, and that behind them the sky is already clearing. And because they know this, deeply and from long experience, they are not frightened. They do not brace. They simply wait, with a patience born from understanding, and they let the storm move through. They might even close their eyes and listen to the rain, finding in its rhythm something almost beautiful. Both people remain standing, but for very different reasons. This is one of the most beautiful and useful teachings within the Buddhist understanding of equanimity. That inner steadiness is not one single thing. It comes from two very different sources, and understanding both of them gives us a much richer, much more practical sense of what it means to stay balanced in the middle of a life that is always moving. The first kind of steadiness is what the tradition calls equanimity of balance. It is the stability that comes from being well grounded, centered, physically and emotionally rooted in something solid. Think of a tripod. A single leg is unstable. It topples at the slightest push. Two legs are better, but they still wobble. Three legs though, and something changes. The structure finds its balance. It can hold weight. It can withstand pressure from different directions. And if you add more legs, 4, 5, 6, the stability only increases. Each additional point of contact with the ground makes the whole structure harder to tip over. This is what happens inside us when we develop certain inner qualities. Each one becomes another point of contact, another leg, another source of stability. When we are grounded in our body, that is one leg. When we have cultivated some calm, that is another. When there is a capacity for joy, for concentration, for kindness, each of these becomes another point of balance. And the more of these are present, the more naturally the mind settles into equanimity. Not because we are holding ourselves in place through effort, but because the structure itself is stable. Let us explore what this feels like in the simplest possible way. Right now, wherever you are being held by something. A bed, perhaps. A chair. A couch. The ground beneath a floor. And your body is resting against this support, making contact in dozens of places. The back of your legs. Your shoulders. Your spine. Your hands, wherever they have come to rest. Each of these points of contact is holding you, and together they create a feeling that is so ordinary you may not even notice it. The feeling of being supported, of not having to hold yourself up, of being able to relax because the ground is there and it is not going anywhere. This is the first kind of equanimity in miniature. It is a physical thing, a felt thing, and it begins with the body. The ancient teachers placed great emphasis on this. They observed that when we are disconnected from our bodies, living entirely in the swirl of thoughts and worries and plans, we are far more easily pulled off center. It is as if we are a kite without a string, blown about by every passing current. But when we are settled in the body, feeling our weight, feeling the ground, feeling the breath moving in and out, there is an anchor. The winds still blow, but we are tethered to something real. You may have noticed this in your own life without having a name for it. There are days when you feel solid, present, in your skin. On those days, small annoyances roll off you easily. Someone cuts in front of you, and you barely notice. A plan changes, and you adapt without fuss. You feel steady, and you are not entirely sure why. And there are other days when you feel unmoored, scattered, as if your mind is in 12 places at once, and your body is just along for the ride. On those days, the smallest things can set you off. A mislaid key, a slow line, an offhand remark. Everything lands harder because there is nothing absorbing the impact. The difference, more often than not, is simply how present you are in your body. How much of you is actually here? Let us explore a story about this kind of grounding. There was a teacher who was known for being remarkably calm, even in situations that would rattle most people. Students would sometimes test this, bringing him unexpected news or asking provocative questions just to see if they could disturb his composure. They never could. One day, a student finally asked him directly, "How do you stay so steady? What is your secret?" The teacher smiled and held out his hand, palm up. "Feel your feet," he said. The student looked confused. "That is all? Just feel my feet?" "When you are in your body," the teacher said, "truly in your body, the mind has a home. It is not wandering. It is not spinning. It is here. And when the mind is here, it is very difficult for anything to carry it away. Most people lose their balance, not because the wind is too strong, but because they were not standing in their body when the wind arrived." The student tried it. He stood quietly and brought all of his attention to the sensation of his feet on the floor. The weight, the warmth, the subtle pressure of the ground pushing up to meet him. And for a moment, just a moment, everything else fell away. The worries, the plans, the restless thinking. What remained was a simple, clear, physical presence. And in that presence, there was a steadiness that he had not felt before. "This is not the whole practice," the teacher said gently, "but it is the beginning of it. Come back to the body, again and again. It will always be here for you. Now, the second kind of steadiness comes from a very different place. It comes not from the body but from the mind, not from balance but from understanding. Let us step into a scene to feel what this means. Imagine you are walking through a marketplace. It is crowded and noisy, full of people going about their business. And suddenly, a stranger turns toward you and says something sharp and unkind, something that seems to come from nowhere. Your first reaction is a jolt, a sting. The body tightens. The mind narrows. What did I do? Why would they say that? And if this were all you knew about the situation, you might carry that sting with you for the rest of the day. You might replay it, build stories around it, feel hurt or angry or confused. But now imagine that, a moment later, a shopkeeper nearby leans toward you and quietly says, "Please, do not take it to heart." That person has a condition that causes them to speak in ways they cannot control. They have struggled with it their whole life. It causes them great pain. They do not mean what they say. Notice what happens inside you when you hear this. The sting does not vanish entirely, perhaps, but something changes. Something loosens. The tightness in your chest eases. The story the mind was building, the case for outrage, the imagined confrontations, all of it quietly collapses. And in its place, there is something softer, maybe sympathy, maybe even tenderness, because now you see the situation differently. You understand something you did not understand a moment ago. And that understanding, all by itself, without any effort or technique or spiritual practice, has changed how you feel. You might even find yourself looking back at the stranger with different eyes. A moment ago, they were a source of hurt. Now, you see a person carrying a burden that you cannot imagine. A person who wakes up every morning knowing that their body may betray them in public in ways that cause embarrassment and pain. A person who has likely lost friendships, endured judgment, and faced more moments of shame than you can count. And your small moment of discomfort, seen in the light of their long struggle, takes on a very different proportion. This is the second kind of equanimity. Equanimity that comes from seeing clearly, from understanding what is actually happening rather than reacting to what we imagine is happening. And it is remarkable how quickly and completely it can transform a situation once the understanding arrives. This kind of equanimity is available in many situations once we learn to look for it. When someone at work is difficult or short-tempered, and we learn that they are going through a painful time in their personal life, something in us softens. We do not take their sharpness personally anymore. We see it for what it is, an overflow of suffering, not an attack on us. When a friend cancels plans at the last moment, and we discover they have been overwhelmed and exhausted and simply could not face one more thing, the irritation fades. In its place, concern, understanding, perhaps the quiet wish to help. When a child is behaving badly, and we pause long enough to notice that they are overtired, or hungry, or frightened about something they do not know how to express, the frustration gives way to tenderness. The behavior has not changed, but what we see behind it has, and that changes everything. Even in our relationship with ourselves, this kind of equanimity is possible. When we notice that we are anxious or restless or irritable, and instead of judging ourselves for it, we pause and wonder, what am I carrying right now? What is happening beneath the surface that I have not yet noticed? That curiosity, that willingness to understand rather than condemn, is itself a form of equanimity. It is the mind choosing to look more deeply rather than react to the surface. There is a story told about a teacher who was asked how to deal with anger. The teacher said, "When anger arises, do not push it away, and do not act on it. Instead, sit down beside it, the way you would sit beside a frightened child, and ask it gently, 'What are you trying to protect?' This is understanding in action, not analyzing, not intellectualizing, just turning toward what is happening with a soft and curious attention and letting the understanding come on its own." The Buddha spoke often about the value of right understanding. He suggested that much of our suffering comes not from the events of our lives, but from the way we interpret those events. The same situation, seen through the lens of fear, produces one response. Seen through the lens of understanding, it produces another entirely. The situation has not changed, but the way we see it has, and the way we see it determines how we feel and how we respond. There is a small but important detail in this teaching that is easy to overlook. The two kinds of equanimity, balance and understanding, are not separate tracks. They are not two paths that lead to different places. They work together. They strengthen each other. They are, in a way, like two hands that hold the same cup. When the body is calm and grounded, the mind sees more clearly. You know this from your own experience. When you are rested and at ease, when you have slept well and eaten well and taken care of yourself, you are far more patient, far more understanding, far more generous in how you interpret other people's behavior. The colleague who irritated you yesterday seems merely human today. The delay that would have frustrated you last week barely registers this week. Not because the world has changed, but because you are standing in your body, and from that grounded place, the mind has room to be kind. But when you are exhausted or anxious or in pain, everything feels like a provocation. Every small thing lands with the weight of something large. The mind loses its ability to see clearly because the body has lost its ground. It is as if someone has pulled the string off the kite, and now every gust carries you. And the reverse is also true. When the mind understands what is happening, the body relaxes. Think again of the moment in the marketplace when you learned the truth about the stranger. In that instant of understanding, the shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches, the breathing slows, the belly softens. The understanding did not just change your thoughts, it changed your body. It released a tension that the body had been holding on the mind's behalf. So these two kinds of steadiness feed each other in a beautiful, continuous circle. The calmer the body, the clearer the mind. The clearer the mind, the calmer the body. And as both deepen, equanimity grows, not as something we are maintaining through effort, but as something that is simply present, naturally, like warmth from a fire that has been tended well, like light in a room where the curtains have been gently drawn open. There is a teaching from the Zen tradition that brings these two kinds of steadiness together in a single image. A master once said, "Sitting quietly, the body becomes still. When the body is still, the mind becomes clear. When the mind is clear, you can see the whole world without moving." This is not about sitting on a cushion, necessarily. It is about the quality of being fully here, body and mind together, grounded and clear, rooted and aware. And from that place of wholeness, the world looks very different. The storms still come. The winds still blow. But you are standing in both kinds of steadiness at once. Your body knows how to stand, and your mind knows that the storm will pass. There is a verse from the Dhammapada that speaks to this quality of understanding with beautiful simplicity. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This does not mean turning away from life. It means turning away from the habit of clinging to things that are always changing. It means understanding, deeply and with compassion, that everything moves, everything shifts, everything transforms. And in that understanding, there is a freedom that no amount of grasping can provide. The difficult meeting at work will end. The sleepless night will give way to morning. The season of worry will soften into a season of ease. The praise will fade. The blame will fade. The pleasure and the pain will take their turns, as they always have, as they always will. And beneath it all, in the body and in the mind, there is a place that does not need any of it to change. That place is already here, right now, in the weight of your body against whatever is holding you, in the quiet understanding that this moment, like every moment before it, is passing gently into the next. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel whatever you feel, and when you are ready, we will continue together. A teacher once sat before a group of students and, without explanation, took off his glasses. He held them up in the light, turning them slowly, as if seeing them for the first time. The room grew quiet. Everyone watched, not quite sure what was happening. Then he said, very simply, "These glasses are not mine." The students waited for more, but the teacher just set the glasses down gently on the table and looked at them with a soft smile. A few students exchanged glances. Someone shifted in their seat. It was a strange thing to say. Of course they were his glasses. He wore them every day. He had probably chosen them, paid for them, cleaned them 100 times. In every ordinary sense, they belonged to him. But the teacher was pointing to something deeper than ownership. He was pointing to the way we hold things. The way we wrap our identity around our possessions, our roles, our relationships, even our feelings, and say, "This is mine. This belongs to me. This is who I am." And how, when any of these things shift, or change, or move beyond our reach, we suffer, not because of the change itself, but because of the grip we had on it. Because we had confused having something with being something. These glasses are not mine. Such a small sentence. But it opens onto something vast. And the student who heard it said later that it was the deepest teaching they had ever received. Not because it was complicated, but because it was so simple that it went straight to the heart. Tonight, we are going to spend some time with the kinds of understanding that, when they settle into our hearts, naturally give rise to the steadiness we have been exploring. Not techniques, not strategies, just ways of seeing that, once they become part of how we look at the world, change everything about how we move through it. The teacher with the glasses was offering one of them. The understanding that we hold things more tightly than we need to, and that loosening our grip, even just a little, creates a spaciousness inside us that nothing else can provide. Let us sit with a few of these understandings together, not as ideas to be memorized, but as lenses to try on. Ways of seeing that, if they resonate, you can carry with you into the days ahead. The first understanding is one we have touched on before, but it deserves a deeper look. It is the understanding that behind most unkind or hurtful behavior, there is suffering we cannot see. Let us explore a story. There was a family going through a difficult season. The parents were both working long hours. The children were young and needed more attention than there was time to give. The house felt too small. The days felt too short. And the weight of it all was settling on everyone differently. The father, in particular, had become quieter than usual. He had always been a warm person, quick to laugh, easy to talk to. But lately, he came home in the evenings and seemed to disappear behind a wall. He was there physically, sitting at the table, passing the dishes, answering questions about the day. But something essential was missing. The light in his eyes had dimmed. And when the children asked him to play, he would sometimes say, not unkindly, but with a heaviness that they could feel, "Not tonight. I am too tired." His partner noticed. Of course she did. And at first, she felt hurt. Then frustrated. Then resentful. "I am tired too," she thought. "I am carrying just as much. Why do I still show up and he does not?" The story in her mind grew more elaborate with each passing week. He does not care enough. He is not trying. Something is wrong with us. And then one evening, after the children were in bed, she found him sitting alone in the kitchen. Not reading, not looking at his phone, just sitting, staring at the wall, with his hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She sat down across from him, and instead of saying what she had been rehearsing in her mind for weeks, she said something else. Something simpler. "You seem so heavy lately. What is going on?" And he told her. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. He spoke about a fear he had been carrying, a worry about work, about money, about whether he was providing enough, being enough. He spoke about feeling like he was failing at the one thing that mattered most. He spoke about the tiredness that went deeper than sleep could reach. And as she listened, something changed in her. The frustration did not vanish, exactly, but it made room for something else. She could see, for the first time in weeks, the suffering behind his withdrawal. It was not that he did not care. It was that he cared so much and was so overwhelmed by the caring that he had retreated into the only safe place he could find. Not away from his family, into himself. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. They sat like that for a while. Nothing was solved. The worries were still there. The money was still tight. The days were still too full. But something between them had shifted. A wall had come down, not through argument or confrontation, but through the simple act of one person being willing to look past the surface and see what was really there. Later, she would say that this was the moment things began to turn. Not because the circumstances changed, but because she stopped telling herself the story of a partner who did not care and began to see a partner who was quietly drowning. And that shift in seeing, that one small change in understanding, was enough to let the love back in. This is what understanding does. It does not excuse harmful behavior. It does not ask us to accept being neglected or mistreated, but it allows us to see the full picture, or at least a fuller picture, and when we see more of the picture, the need to react from our own hurt begins to soften. We are still allowed to feel what we feel. We are still allowed to ask for what we need. But we can do it from a place of understanding rather than a place of blame. And that changes everything about how the conversation goes. The Buddhist tradition has a phrase for this way of seeing. It speaks of looking with the eyes of compassion, not the eyes of judgment, not the eyes of self-protection, but the eyes that say, I can see that you are struggling, and I can hold that understanding without losing myself. This is equanimity woven together with love. It is what happens when the steady mind and the warm heart work as one. The second understanding is about impermanence. And while that word might sound heavy, the teaching itself is one of the most comforting things the Buddhist tradition has to offer. Let us explore another story. A very gentle one. There was a young family, and they were going through a season when everything felt hard. The baby was not sleeping. The older child was going through a difficult phase. The house was noisy, the nights were long, and both parents felt stretched beyond what they thought they could bear. One particularly overwhelming afternoon, the mother looked at her partner across the kitchen, both of them exhausted, both of them frayed. And instead of saying any of the 100 things she might have said in frustration, she simply sighed and said, "We are having one of those days." That was all. We are having one of those days. But something in those words held a gentle wisdom. Not a dismissal of the difficulty. Not a pretending that everything was fine. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this was a day. One day. Not a life sentence. Not a permanent condition. Just weather, passing through. And the partner, hearing it, felt something ease inside. Because the worst part of any difficult moment is often not the difficulty itself. It is the fear that it will last forever. It is the story that says, this is how things are now. This is how they will always be. And that story, more than the actual hardship, is what makes us feel trapped. But the truth, the simple, honest, beautiful truth, is that everything changes. The difficult day gives way to an easier one. The sleepless season ends. The child grows. The weight lifts. Not all at once, perhaps. Not on our schedule. But it changes. It always changes. Think of your own life for a moment. Think of a time, a year ago, or 5 years ago, when something felt unbearable, when you could not imagine how you would get through it. And yet, here you are. You did get through it. Not because you were superhuman, but because the situation changed. You changed. Something shifted that you could not have predicted or controlled, and the unbearable thing became bearable, and then it became a memory. And then it became part of the landscape of your life, present, but no longer overwhelming. This is what impermanence means when it is felt, rather than thought about. Not an idea, an experience. The experience of having survived every difficult thing that has ever happened to you. The experience of having watched countless moments of pain soften and pass. The experience of knowing, in your body, and in your bones, that nothing stays the same. The Buddha observed this with great clarity and repeated it often. All things that arise will also pass away. Not as a warning, but as a comfort. As a reminder that no storm lasts forever, and that the capacity to endure is strengthened enormously by the knowledge that endurance has a natural end. We are having one of those days. What a kind and truthful thing to say. What a gentle way of remembering that this, too, is temporary. What a gift to offer another person who is struggling beside you. The third understanding is about something the tradition calls shared humanity, and it is perhaps the simplest of all. Every person you will ever meet is carrying something. Every person has known disappointment. Every person has lain awake at night worrying about something. Every person has felt the sting of being misunderstood, the ache of wanting something they could not have, the confusion of not knowing what to do next. This is not a depressing thought. It is a connecting one. When we remember that everyone around us is navigating the same basic territory of being human, something in us relaxes. We are not alone in our struggles. The person who cut us off in traffic is struggling. The person who spoke harshly is struggling. The person who seems to have everything together is, behind closed doors, struggling with something we know nothing about. The Buddha said, "Just as I wish to be happy and free from suffering, so do all beings wish to be happy and free from suffering." This is not a complex teaching. A child could understand it. But living it, truly living it, changes the way we meet every person we encounter. Imagine standing in a long line somewhere, feeling impatient, feeling like your time is being wasted. And then imagine remembering, for just a moment, that every other person in that line is also waiting, also tired, also wishing they were somewhere else, also carrying their own private worries and hopes and fears. And that the person at the front of the line, the one who seems to be taking so long, is probably not doing it to inconvenience you. They are simply a person navigating their own small challenge, doing the best they can. Something shifts when we see this way. The impatience does not necessarily disappear, but it loses its sharpness. It becomes softer, broader, less personal. It becomes something we are sharing with everyone around us rather than suffering alone. And in that shared experience, there is, strangely, a kind of comfort. It is hard to hold a grudge against someone when you remember that they, too, are doing their best with a heart that sometimes aches. It is hard to take someone's sharpness personally when you remember that sharpness almost always comes from pain, not from strength. And it is hard to feel isolated in your own difficulties when you remember that somewhere, right now, countless other people are lying awake with the same kinds of worries, the same kinds of fears, the same quiet longing for peace. We are in this together, all of us. And that recognition, when it is allowed to sink in deeply enough, is itself a kind of equanimity. The heart softens, the grip loosens, and we find ourselves standing on common ground with every person alive. The teacher who held up his glasses was offering all of this in a single gesture. These glasses are not mine. This body is borrowed. This role is temporary. These emotions will pass through me like weather through an open window. I can hold all of it, enjoy all of it, care for all of it, without clutching at any of it. And this is perhaps the most freeing thing of all. That loosening our grip does not mean caring less. It means caring differently. It means holding the people we love the way we hold water in cupped hands, gently, attentively, knowing that it will flow and change and move, and that our job is not to trap it but to be present with it for as long as it is here. Think of a parent watching a child grow. There is joy in each stage, and there is a natural sadness when each stage passes. The baby becomes a toddler, becomes a child, becomes a young person. And at every transition, the parent faces a choice. They can clutch at what was, grieving the baby who no longer exists, the toddler who has outgrown their favorite shoes. Or they can open their hands and meet who is here now, in this moment, with the same freshness and wonder they brought to the very beginning. Both responses are human. Both are understandable. But one leads to suffering, and the other leads to a deep, bittersweet joy that is very close to equanimity. The joy of being fully present with what is, without demanding that it stay. There is a Zen poem that says, "The wild geese do not intend to cast their reflection. The water has no mind to receive their image. Things come, things go. Reflections appear and dissolve. And neither the geese nor the water are troubled by any of it. They do not cling. They do not resist. They simply allow what is happening to happen and what is passing to pass. We are not asked to be indifferent. We are asked to be free. Free from the exhausting habit of trying to hold on to what is moving, and free from the equally exhausting habit of trying to push away what has already arrived. Free to enjoy what is here without demanding that it stay. Free to feel what is painful without believing it will never end. And in that freedom, there is a steadiness that no amount of effort could manufacture. It is the steadiness of a heart that has finally stopped fighting with the way things are. A heart that has learned to say, with great gentleness, "This is what is here now, and I can be with this. And when it changes, I can be with that too." Let us pause here for a moment. Let everything be just as it is. And when you are ready, we will continue together. Somewhere inside you, beneath the noise and the busyness and the endless stream of things to do and think about, there is something quiet, something warm. You have felt it at times, though you may not have had a name for it. It is there in the first few seconds of waking, before the mind begins its planning. It is there in the pause between one breath and the next. It is there in those rare moments when everything falls still and you find yourself simply present, simply here, with nothing to fix and nowhere to go. It is a kind of well-being that does not depend on anything going right. It is not happiness, exactly, though happiness can arise from it. It is not excitement or pleasure or the satisfaction of getting what you want. It is something quieter and more fundamental than any of those. It is more like the feeling of being okay at the deepest level. The feeling that, beneath everything, you are whole. The Buddhist tradition speaks of this inner well-being with great tenderness. It is considered something precious, something worth protecting, something that deserves our care. And one of the most beautiful ways to understand equanimity is as the protector of this inner treasure, the guardian at the gate, the one who stands watch, not with aggression or rigidity, but with a gentle, steady presence, making sure that the precious thing inside is not covered over or carried away by the storms of our reactivity. Let us sit with this image for a moment, because it changes everything about how we think of equanimity. If equanimity were just about being calm, it would be a modest thing. Useful, perhaps, but not especially inspiring. If it were just about not reacting, it might even seem cold. A kind of emotional detachment that keeps us safe at the cost of keeping us distant. But that is not what the tradition is describing. What the tradition is describing is something much more alive. Equanimity, in this understanding, is the quality that protects the most beautiful things inside us. Our capacity for love, our capacity for joy, our capacity for wonder and compassion and deep connection. These qualities are always there, always available, always quietly shining. But they are easily obscured. Every time we are caught by anger, a layer of dust settles over them. Every time we are swept up in craving or fear or resentment, the light dims a little more. Not because the light has gone out. It never goes out. But because we have covered it with something else. Think of a lamp in a room. The lamp is always burning. Its light is steady and warm, casting a soft glow over everything it touches. But if you drape cloth after cloth over it, each one a reactive moment, each one a time you were caught by something and lost your balance, the room gets darker. One cloth for the argument you had this morning. Another for the resentment you carried all afternoon. Another for the worry that kept you awake last night. Another for the harsh words you said and wished you could take back. The lamp is still there beneath all of it. The light is still burning, but you can barely see it anymore. And after enough layers, you might forget the lamp was there at all. You might look around the dim room of your inner life and think, this is just how it is. This is just who I am. A person who lives in a dim room. But the lamp never went out. It was just waiting for someone to gently lift the cloths. Equanimity is the practice of not adding more cloth, and sometimes, gently, of removing a layer or two. Not through force, not through self-criticism, but through the simple, patient act of noticing what we are doing and choosing, when we can, to do it differently. Each time we notice a reactive impulse and let it pass without acting on it, a cloth lifts. Each time we meet a difficult moment with patience instead of anger, the room gets a little brighter. And slowly, over time, the lamp becomes visible again, and its warmth, which was never gone, begins once more to reach the people and the moments around us. This is where mindfulness enters the picture. And mindfulness, in the Buddhist tradition, is not a technique or a brand or something you do for 10 minutes with an app. It is something much simpler and much more profound. It is the capacity to see what is actually happening as it is happening without adding a story on top of it. Let us explore what this looks like in the context of equanimity. Imagine you are going about your day and something happens that begins to pull you off center. Perhaps someone says something careless. Perhaps you receive news that is not what you hoped for. Perhaps you simply notice a familiar pattern of worry beginning to tighten in your chest. Now, without mindfulness, what happens next is automatic. The mind grabs hold of the experience, begins building a story around it, and within seconds, you are caught. You are angry, or anxious, or defensive, and you barely notice the transition. You went from calm to caught so quickly that it felt like the reaction was the only option, as if you had no choice. But with mindfulness, there is a gap. A small, precious gap between the experience and the reaction. The careless words arrive, and you feel the sting. But before the story builds, before the mind begins its familiar pattern of blaming or defending, there is a moment of seeing. A moment where you can observe what is happening inside you, clearly and without judgment. Ah, there is a sting. Something in me is tightening. The mind wants to react. That moment of seeing is everything. Because in that moment, you have a choice. You can follow the old pattern as you have 1,000 times before. Or you can pause. You can breathe. You can let the sting be there without building a house around it. And something remarkable happens in that pause. The sting, which felt so large and so urgent a moment ago, begins to lose its grip. Without the story to feed it, without the mind's interpretation fanning it into a fire, it is just a sensation. A tightness that arrived and, when left alone, begins to soften. A heat that, when met with patience instead of fuel, begins to cool. And the lamp inside, the quiet well-being that was about to be covered over, remains visible, remains warm, remains available. You might even notice, in those moments of clear seeing, a kind of wonder. How extraordinary that I just saw that happen. A moment ago, I was about to be carried away, and instead, I simply watched. There is a quiet joy in this. Not the joy of victory or achievement, but the joy of freedom. The joy of discovering that you are not your reactions. That there is a part of you that is larger and older and much more still, that can watch the whole process without being swept into it. This is what the guardian does. Not by fighting off the intruders, but by simply seeing them clearly enough that they lose their power. Not by building higher walls, but by turning on a light. There is a story from the tradition that illustrates this beautifully. A student came to a teacher and said, "I keep losing my equanimity. I sit in meditation and I feel peaceful. But the moment I step into the world, something happens and I am caught again. I get angry. I get anxious. I get lost in wanting things to be different. I feel like I am failing." The teacher listened with great care. Then she said, "You are not failing. You are learning." The student looked up, surprised. "Every time you notice that you have lost your equanimity," the teacher continued, "you have just practiced mindfulness. You have just seen something clearly. And that seeing is not a failure. It is the practice itself. The question is not whether you lose your balance. You will lose your balance. Everyone does. The question is what you do in the moment you notice. What should I do?" the student asked. "Be curious," the teacher said. "Instead of scolding yourself, become interested. Ask yourself, gently, what happened there? What was the trigger? What story did the mind begin to tell? Where did I feel it in my body? Not to fix it, not to prevent it from ever happening again, but to understand it. Because the more deeply you understand how you lose your balance, the less power those patterns have over you. You begin to see them coming from a long way off. Like watching clouds approach from the horizon. You know the clouds are coming. You can see their shape and color. And because you see them, you are not caught by surprise when they arrive. You simply note, here come the clouds of irritation. Here come the clouds of worry. I know these clouds. They have come before, and they have always passed." The student sat with this for a long time, turning it over in his mind. Then he said, "So the goal is not to never lose my balance. The goal is to understand why I do." The teacher smiled. "Now you are beginning to see. And I will tell you something else. The understanding itself becomes a kind of balance. The more you know your own mind, the more familiar you become with its weather, the less any of it can surprise you. And what cannot surprise you cannot easily carry you away. This is one of the most compassionate and liberating aspects of the Buddhist understanding of equanimity. It does not ask us to be perfect. It does not expect us to reach some elevated state and then stay there forever, never wobbling, never struggling, never being human. It simply asks us to pay attention, to be honest with ourselves about what pulls us off center, and to meet that honesty with curiosity rather than shame. There is such a difference between these two responses. When we lose our balance and immediately think, I should be better than this. What is wrong with me? I have been practicing for so long and I still get angry. The mind contracts. It adds another layer of suffering on top of the original upset. The anger, plus shame about the anger. The anxiety, plus frustration about the anxiety. It is suffering about suffering, and it only makes things worse. But when we lose our balance and think, with genuine warmth, there it is again. How interesting. What happened this time? Something entirely different occurs. The mind opens. There is space. There is room to see clearly. And in that spacious seeing, the pattern begins to lose its grip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gradually, over time, the way a path becomes visible when you walk it often enough. The tradition sometimes calls this wise attention, not forcing the mind to be different, but attending to it with such patience and such kindness that it naturally, gradually, finds its way home. And now we arrive at something that brings our whole journey tonight to a deeper place. The tradition tells us that equanimity, the kind of equanimity that is considered a true perfection, cannot exist in isolation. It must be connected to two things, two concerns that give it its full meaning and its full power. The first is compassion for others. The second is a sincere wish for our own freedom and peace. Both directions, outward and inward, the welfare of others and the welfare of ourselves. When equanimity is connected to both of these, it becomes something much greater than personal calm. It becomes a force in the world. Let us feel what this means. Equanimity without compassion is cold. It is the person who watches the world's pain from a comfortable distance and says, "That is not my concern. That is not what the tradition is pointing toward." That is withdrawal, not wisdom. And equanimity without concern for our own well-being is also incomplete. It is the person who gives and gives until there is nothing left, who absorbs everyone else's suffering without tending to their own, who confuses selflessness with self-neglect. That, too, is not what the tradition is pointing toward. That is exhaustion wearing the mask of virtue. True equanimity holds both. It says, I care deeply about the suffering in this world, and I am committed to not adding to it, including the suffering I cause myself. It says, I will respond to what is in front of me with as much wisdom and compassion as I can, and I will also protect the well-being inside me that makes that response possible. Think of a person who works in a field that involves great human need. A healer, perhaps. A caregiver. A person who gives of themselves every day to ease the pain of others. If that person does not also tend to their own peace, their own rest, their own inner light, they will eventually burn out. The compassion that once flowed naturally will dry up. The patience that once seemed endless will fray. And the people they serve will lose not just a helper, but the quality of presence that made that help truly healing. But if that person also cares for themselves, if they protect their equanimity, tend their inner lamp, make sure there is quiet and rest and spaciousness in their own life, then the giving does not deplete them. It nourishes them, because the giving and the receiving of peace are not separate acts. They are one continuous flow. This is the guardian at the gate, standing with arms open, not closed, not defensive, but open and attentive and steady, letting love flow outward, letting peace settle inward, and maintaining the balance between the two so that neither one is sacrificed for the other. There is a verse sometimes attributed to the Buddha that says, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This is a radical teaching, because so many of us have learned, somewhere along the way, that caring for ourselves is selfish, that our own peace does not matter as much as the peace of others, that a truly good person puts themselves last. But the tradition sees it differently. The tradition says that the peace inside you is not separate from the peace you bring to others. They are the same peace. The well-being you protect in yourself is the same well-being that allows you to be generous, patient, kind, and present for the people in your life. If you let the lamp inside you go dark, you have nothing left to offer. If you keep the lamp burning, its light reaches everyone around you, often without your even trying. So equanimity is not selfish, and it is not selfless. It is something that holds both self and other with equal tenderness. It is the understanding that in taking care of this inner light, you are also taking care of the world. One steady, quiet, luminous heart at a time. Let us rest here. Let the breath find its own rhythm. And when you are ready, we will continue together one last time. Have you ever watched a flower open? Not in a time-lapse film where the whole thing happens in a few seconds, but in real life, in a garden, or on a windowsill, over the slow course of a morning. It is one of the most quietly miraculous things in the world, and most of us have never truly seen it happen, because it happens so slowly that it does not register as movement. But if you sat beside a flower that was about to bloom, say a lotus rising from still water, or a simple bud on a branch outside your window, and if you had the patience to simply watch, you would notice something remarkable. The petals do not force themselves open. There is no effort, no straining, no dramatic moment where the flower decides, "Now I will bloom." Instead, there is a slow, steady responding to conditions. The warmth of the morning sun reaching the petals, the moisture drawn up through the stem, the quiet chemistry of life doing what life does, without fanfare, without announcement, and at some point, without any single moment you could point to as the beginning, the flower is open. Fully, softly, completely open. It did not try to be open. It simply became open because everything it needed was already in place. The petals are soft. The colors are vivid. And if you lean close, there may be a scent, faint and sweet, that seems to have arrived from nowhere. The whole thing is effortless and astonishing at the same time. This is one of the most beautiful images the Buddhist tradition offers for the deepest kind of equanimity. Not as something we achieve through force of will, not as something we can demand of ourselves, but as something that flowers naturally and in its own time when the conditions are right. We have spent this evening together exploring many of those conditions. The generosity that opens the heart, the integrity that steadies the ground, the patience that allows things to unfold, the understanding that clears the mind, the loving kindness that warms everything it touches. All of these qualities, tended faithfully over time, create the soil in which something extraordinary can grow. And what grows, when the soil is deep enough and rich enough, is a peace so complete that the mind simply has nothing left to struggle against. There is nothing it needs to push away. There is nothing it needs to reach for. There is nothing it needs to fix or change or control. For once, perhaps for the first time, the mind is simply at rest. Not because the world has become perfect, but because the mind has become whole. The old teachers had a beautiful way of describing this. They said that when the mind is completely balanced, when equanimity is so deep and so thorough that not the faintest ripple of grasping or aversion remains, something unexpected happens. The mind lets go of itself. Now, this is a phrase worth sitting with gently, because it is easy to misunderstand. It does not mean that the mind disappears. It does not mean that we stop thinking or feeling or being ourselves. It is something much more subtle and much more tender than that. Think of it this way. For most of our lives, the mind is busy. Busy wanting things. Busy avoiding things. Busy telling stories about who we are and what we need and what might go wrong. Busy defending, comparing, planning, worrying. It is as if the mind is a hand that is always holding something, always grasping, always gripping, always carrying a load. And then, after a long time of cultivating the qualities we have explored tonight, after developing generosity and patience and wisdom and love, after learning to stand steady in the midst of the 8 winds, after tending the lamp and preparing the soil, there comes a moment when the hand has nothing left to hold. Not because everything has been taken away, but because everything has been gently set down. The grudges, the worries, the demands, the defenses. One by one, over time, they have been released. And the hand, empty at last, does something it may never have done before. It opens, not because someone told it to, not because of a technique or a method or a moment of great willpower, but because that is what hands do when they are no longer holding anything. They open, naturally, effortlessly, the way a flower opens when the conditions are right, the way a fist unclenches in sleep, the way the whole body softens when, after carrying something heavy for a long distance, you finally set it down. And when the mind opens in this way, when it lets go of everything it has been carrying, including the very effort of trying to let go, what remains is not emptiness. It is not a blank void. What remains is spaciousness, a vast, quiet, luminous openness that the old texts describe as the most precious thing a human being can experience. It is like stepping out of a small, crowded room into an open meadow. The meadow was always there. You were just standing inside the room, with the door closed, and you had forgotten how wide the world actually is. The old teachers said that in this openness, the mind becomes like the sky. Clouds still pass through it. Feelings, thoughts, sensations, experiences of every kind still move across it. But the sky is never disturbed by its clouds. It does not grab them. It does not push them away. It simply holds them effortlessly in its vast and boundless space. And the clouds, having nothing to stick to, drift on through. There is a teaching from the Zen tradition that says, enlightenment is an accident. Practice makes us accident-prone. This is said with a smile, but it carries a deep truth. We cannot force the deepest peace to arrive. We cannot make it happen through sheer willpower. But we can create the conditions in which it is more likely to arise. We can tend the soil. We can keep the lamp burning. We can develop the qualities that make the mind stable and clear and warm. And then, when the moment comes, when the conditions are just right, the mind lets go. Not because we told it to, but because it was ready. It is like a fruit that ripens on a tree. You cannot pull the fruit from the branch before it is ready. If you try, it will be hard and bitter. But if you tend the tree, water it, protect it from harsh weather, make sure the roots are deep and the soil is rich, the fruit will ripen in its own time. And when it is ready, truly ready, it does not need to be pulled. It falls gently into your open hand. Let us return, for a moment, to an image from earlier in our journey. The gold in the crucible. We spoke of the master craftsman who patiently heats and cools and refines the gold, cycle after cycle, removing impurities until what remains is pure and bright and luminous. We said that the old texts described this gold as pliant, malleable, and free from all dross, ready to be shaped into anything beautiful. Now imagine the gold at the very end of that process. The last impurity has been removed. The last trace of dross has been lifted away. The craftsman sets down his tools. He wipes his hands, and he looks at what rests in the crucible before him. The gold simply glows. It is not waiting to become something. It is not striving to be shaped. It is not reaching for the next step or the next achievement. It just rests in the crucible, luminous, complete, not because something was added to it, but because everything that was not gold has been removed. What remains is the essence, pure, warm, radiant, ready for anything, but needing nothing. This is what the mind is like when it lets go of itself. It is not striving anymore. It is not becoming anymore. It is simply being what it has always been, beneath all the layers, beneath all the accumulation, beneath all the stories and struggles and searching. The pure gold that was there from the very beginning, now finally uncovered, now finally allowed to shine. And perhaps the most comforting part of this teaching is that the gold was never in danger. It was never damaged by the impurities that surrounded it. It was never diminished by the years of being hidden. It was simply waiting, with infinite patience, for the conditions that would allow it to be seen. The tradition speaks of this with great reverence and also with great simplicity. Because in the end, what the whole path comes down to is this: we are not trying to become something we are not. We are trying to uncover something we already are. Every act of generosity peels away a layer of self-concern. Every moment of patience peels away a layer of resistance. Every flash of understanding peels away a layer of confusion. And equanimity, the last and highest quality, is what remains when enough layers have been peeled away that the mind can finally see itself clearly. And in seeing itself clearly, it recognizes that there is nothing left to hold on to, nothing left to defend, nothing left to prove. And so it lets go, not of the world, not of love, not of life, but of the grasping that made all of these things feel so heavy. The grasping that turned pleasure into addiction, and love into possession, and life into an endless project of becoming. Without the grasping, everything is still here. The world is still beautiful. The people we love are still precious. The morning light still falls across the room in the same way. The bread still tastes good. The laughter of children still fills the air with something bright. But everything feels different. Lighter, clearer, more spacious. As if a window that had been painted shut for years has finally been opened, and the fresh air is pouring in, and we can breathe in a way we had forgotten was possible. Colors seem more vivid. Sounds seem more clear. Not because the world has changed, but because the filter through which we were seeing it, the filter of wanting and worrying and judging and planning, has become transparent. We see things as they are, not as we feared they were or wished they would be. And what they are, it turns out, is enough. More than enough. It is extraordinary. This is what the tradition means when it speaks of liberation. Not an escape from life, a deeper arrival into it. There is a verse from the Buddhist scriptures that says, "The mind that clings to nothing is the mind that is free." This is not a teaching about indifference. It is a teaching about trust. Trusting that we do not need to grip so tightly. Trusting that the world will not fall apart if we loosen our hold. Trusting that the deepest, most precious things, love, connection, meaning, beauty, are not things we can possess anyway. They are things we participate in, things we open to, things that flow through us when we stop trying to trap them. And equanimity is the quality that makes this trust possible. Because when the mind is steady, when it has been refined and balanced and made whole through all the patient work we have explored tonight, it discovers something astonishing. That it does not need to hold anything in order to be full. That fullness, real fullness, comes not from accumulation, but from openness. Not from gathering more, but from grasping less. So tonight, as this journey draws toward its close, you do not need to try to let go of anything. You do not need to force your mind into stillness or peace. You can simply rest, simply be here, simply allow whatever is present to be present without needing it to be different. The very act of resting without agenda, without striving, without trying to arrive anywhere, is itself a small taste of what the old teachers were pointing toward. A moment of trust, a moment of openness, a moment where the hand is not grasping and the mind is not reaching and the heart is simply here, warm and whole and quiet. If sleep is approaching, welcome it. Let it come the way the night comes, gently, gradually, without effort. You have traveled a long way tonight, through stories and teachings and reflections, and you have earned this rest. Let the mind settle like snow falling through still water, each flake drifting slowly, softly, coming to rest on the quiet bottom. Let the body be held by whatever is holding it. Let everything be exactly as it is. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. You do not need to hold on to any of it. Whatever was meant to reach you has already reached you. It has landed somewhere inside, in soil that you have been preparing for longer than you know. And it will grow, in its own time, in its own way, without any effort from you at all. There is a final Zen teaching that seems fitting for this moment. A student once asked a master, "What is the essence of all the teachings?" The master said, "When tired, sleep. When hungry, eat." The student was puzzled. But everyone does that. What makes it a teaching? The master replied, "When most people sleep, they do not just sleep. They worry. They plan. They carry the whole world into their rest. And when they eat, they do not just eat. They rush. They judge. They are already thinking about the next thing. The teaching is simply this: when you sleep, just sleep. When you are here, just be here. That is all. That is everything. So tonight, just be here. Just rest. That is all. That is everything. And so we come to the end of our journey together. Or perhaps not the end, but a resting place. A place to set the pack down for a while and simply be still. Tonight, we have walked through ancient teachings about a quality the old masters placed at the very summit of human development. Equanimity, the unshakable mind. And we have seen that it is not what many people imagine. It is not cold. It is not distant. It is not the absence of feeling. It is the fullest, warmest, most luminous state the mind can know. A mind refined like gold. A heart steady like a deep lake. A presence grounded like a mountain that lets the wind pass through without moving. You do not need to hold on to any of what you heard tonight. The teachings that were meant for you have already found their way in, the way water finds its way through the smallest cracks in stone. They will do their work quietly, in their own time. All that is asked of you now is rest. The same rest that the earth takes when night falls. The same rest that the lake takes when the wind has passed. The same rest that the flower takes after it has opened, with nothing left to do but simply be what it is. May you carry a little more steadiness into your days. May you hold the world a little more gently. And may the quiet light inside you continue to grow, one small and patient moment at a time. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.